Good morning, good afternoon, good
And happy
evening.
Friday.
Happy Friday. The birds are singing louder, the sky is bluer, and $200 billion may be coming back one way or the other to American companies and consumers and voters. And we know it's a great ruling by how upset Donald Trump is as he prepares for his State of the Union address. Yeah, the State of the Union now got a lot stronger now
Yeah,
that tariffs have been ripped down by the United States Supreme Court. I feel sorry for the Supreme Court justices who I think are going to find other things to do than attend the State of the Union because Trump won't be able to help himself. He'll attack them. Gorsuch will suddenly have a squash game that he forgot that he'll have to attend. Someone will have to go wait for a bus. I'm not sure Alito may show up, maybe Thomas.
right.
But the rest of them, there's going to be a lot of tight smiles, when he's making his way past the United States Supreme Court justices. But they did the right thing. They did the thing that's not surprising. If anybody like we are, Adam Klasfeld, All Rise News, Michael Popok, Legal AF, if you just listen to any part of the 2 hours of oral argument 4 months ago, we did predict. Let's take some credit. Sometimes we're right about what's going to happen at the United States Supreme Court. Not always, but we're right more than we're wrong. And if you just listen to Chief Justice Roberts, no surprise that he wrote the majority decision today, striking down the tariffs. We'll talk about the different parts of it, but the heart of the matter, joined by 6. It's bipartisan. It's 3 MAGA Trump appointees, or 2 Trump appointees, and then you've got Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan. They may not all agree on how they get to the same place, but IEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, used in peacetime by a president, cannot be used to tax/tariff. Period. And if you listen to Roberts, you listen to Amy Coney Barrett, you listen to Gorsuch in the oral argument, you knew this decision was coming. So the headline, as we get our audience together here, both All Rise News audience and Legal AF audience sort of coming together here, is that the one statute that Trump relied on to impose both his fentanyl drug tariff sanctions against Mexico, Canada, et cetera, and the 200 reciprocal tariffs that he announced in the Rose Garden Liberation Day. We got Liberation Day today. Both those categories of tariffs have been struck based on the International Economic Emergency Powers Act for one great reason. It's not in the statute, and it's not in the Constitution. The Constitution gives the power solely to Congress to tax and levy taxes and tariffs. They can delegate it to the presidency, but they have to do it expressly in a way that gives them that power. And as John Roberts wrote in his decision, nowhere in the IEPA statute is the reference to the term tariff.
Right.
You're done. You're done. So for most of the justices, all you had to look at, Adam, was the plain language of the statute. You really needed to look no further. If you wanted to go back and look at legislative history, that only strengthened the argument. If you wanted to apply the major questions doctrine, which is an artifice created by MAGA to say, well, when Congress wants to do, that's such a major issue, they must have done it expressly and unambiguously. You can go there too to strengthen your argument. At the end of the day, though, it comes down to, something Anthony Scalia often said. When you're dealing with statutory interpretation, read the statute, read the statute, read the statute. And that's sort of it. All the rest of us, you and I'll talk about here, is interesting, but that's what it came down to. What was your takeaway from the majority opinion, the multiple parts, or the concurrences or the dissents?
Well, first off, what you said and what we were saying before we went live, this was a day that we all thought was coming, and it has now come. Anyone who saw the oral argument saw that this these tariffs were on borrowed time, and now the time has expired. And as you said, Michael, they tried to hang this 1977 law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, on two words: regulate and importation. And here's what Chief Justice Roberts said about that: those words cannot bear such weight. And every single justice on the six justice majority made a point to say that in the half century history of IEPA, of this 1977 law, that there has never been a president who has come to the conclusion that that it could be used to justify tariffs. So this is an unprecedented power grab. It's not in the statute. And what we have here is a clear ruling by the Supreme Court that the President of the United States cannot invent some sort of statutory authority to take a power that only Congress has and do it on a whim. And we said it in a live broadcast quite like this, right after oral arguments, that we were, even amid sweeping cynicism about, this court will find some way to give it back to Trump. And you hear Trump already making noises about, we'll find some other way to accomplish this. Chief Justice Roberts, page 13, the president must, quote, point to clear congressional authorization to justify his extraordinary assertion of the power to impose tariffs. He cannot. It doesn't get more clear than that.
Right.
So I don't doubt that Trump and the White House and all of his lawyers are going to go back to the drawing board, going to try to come up with an equally creative scheme to try to give himself the sweeping power that he doesn't have. But they're going to have to contend with page 13, this majority opinion, these six justices saying it clearly that the congressional authorization has to be explicit, and he can't point to that.
Yeah, not in IEPA. Now, there are other statutes that make it much more difficult for the president, but ultimately can impose certain type of sectoral tariffs. But it's a whole, you got to jump through lots of hoops. There's hearings, there's congressional involvement, there's all the things Donald Trump doesn't want to do because he wants to do it all by fiat. And he because he was on a roll during the initial part of his term, declaring everything an emergency, using quote unquote war powers for everything. They figured out on the way in that they would try to use phony war declarations. We're at war with Venezuela and the narco terrorists. We're at war with the fentanyl trade. We're at war with the couple hundred people we've killed in the Caribbean. We're at war, and then they figured out, well, maybe that's the way we'll get the Supreme Court to give us this ultimate extension of power because we're at war with everything. And the majority said, look, first of all, we're in peacetime. Okay, that's one. They said peacetime about a dozen times in the decision. We're at peacetime. Okay, that's one. Two,
and that the government conceded that. Continue.
yes, exactly. Yeah, continue, Popok. Continue with your role. So that's one. We're at peacetime. So they didn't buy into the and it was framed right at the beginning by Roberts, like, okay, so it's the Mexico-Canada fentanyl trade. And what's over here? Oh, the hollowing out of American manufacturing is the emergency for the Emergency Economic Powers Act. No, we don't buy that. And if they want, Congress knows how to write the word tariff into a statute of delegation when it wants to. And it didn't here, which was a point that was made, you and I, when we covered the en banc decision by 20 or more members of the D.C. Court of Appeals, Circuit Court of Appeals. That was one of the things that came up. Where in IEPA, point to me where the word tariff exists. And then they used the history of no president has ever tried to do it. The reality is IEPA was a statute of limitations, if you will, to limit the power of a president because they were worried that the Jimmy Carters of the world and others would take for themselves the power to tariff when they don't have it. So it was never an empowering statute. It was a statute of literally of limitation. Now, the debate among the three of them was interesting about, can we just rely on the statute? Do we have to go major questions doctrine? Do we have to go to the legislative history? But for me, some of the most powerful words were not anywhere in the majority. They were by Gorsuch in his concurrence. Because if they've lost Gorsuch, who has been, along with Roberts and Kavanaugh and the rest, a major enabler of Donald Trump when it comes to the imperial presidency, the unitary presidency, empowering the presidency to almost levitate above the other two branches. If he's saying in his concurrence, and he doesn't mince words. He's not talking about anybody other than Donald Trump. He says a man. He doesn't say a person in the office, because
Right.
he talked about the one-way ratchet that he was afraid of during oral argument. That if we give the president this power, it's like one of those ratchets that you pick up at Home Depot, and you keep twisting, and it only goes in one direction. If we
Right.
give him this power, how is Congress ever going to get it back?
I actually have that line.
Yeah, give me that quote.
So this is the final paragraph of Gorsuch's concurrence, and he gives a very Schoolhouse Rock view of the situation. Yes, legislating can be hard and takes time. And yes, it can be tempting to bypass Congress when some pressing problem arises. But the deliberative nature of the legislative process was the whole point of its design. And you talk about the other statutory authorities that the executive branch can invoke to try to push tariffs. And you pointed out, yes, those involve congressional involvement, because what were Neil Katyal's words when he started oral arguments for those challenging the tariffs? May it please the court, tariffs are taxes, and taxes
But
are Article 1. Article 1 is Congress. And I want to read the last line of Gorsuch's.
yeah, that's what I want you to read. Read the one about the Republic.
This is the one, it's the very last line. It's not the one you're thinking of. If history is any guide, the tables will turn and the day will come when those disappointed by today's result will appreciate the legislative process for the bulwark of liberty it is. And just take a moment right now to think about the insanity under which we have been living, where you wake up one morning and because of the whim of a single person, the penguins of the Marshall Island are going to have a bad day because he has decided sweeping tariffs on countries and land masses that are uninhabited. This is Gorsuch's rebuke, and you did talk about, as you noted, he was the one who was very sharply questioning about the one-way ratchet, the accumulation of power into one person. 3 dissenting justices were okay with that. Justice Kavanaugh was okay with that. Thomas was very okay with that. He delivered his own dissent that would go as far as anyone. And of course, Alito was fine with that. But you have 2 of the Trump appointees, Barrett and Gorsuch, joining this majority, that it wasn't a 5-4 decision. It was a 6-3 decision. When we were watching oral arguments, there was, I think the only question that we had was, is it 6-3 or is it more lopsided? I'm frankly surprised it wasn't more lopsided.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, when you have the Gorsuches of the world questioning the existential threat of the republic of one man, I mean that me I can't find the quote quick enough for it. But that for me is one of the most, having gone through all the historical references of our founding and why we don't give kings this power, for him to call out Donald Trump not by name but by gender and say we would never give a man this power because it threatens the very republic. If you got Gorsuch to that place, the question now is, I know people are writing, I still don't trust the Supreme Court. And we're not here extolling the virtues of the Supreme Court because they did the right thing on the tariff case. They had no choice to do the right thing on the tariff case. The question is now, when you read the hundreds of pages here of where each justice's head is at when it comes to this administration and its power grab, what does that mean for the other decisions that we're still waiting on? Particularly the Voting Rights Act, I think, is cooked because I don't think this impacts what they're going to do, the MAGA majority to eviscerate the Voting Rights Act. I think that's cooked. But I do think this could be very, very helpful as a window into the thinking of Supreme Court justices like Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch when it comes to birthright citizenship and the attempt to change the 14th Amendment through an executive order. If I'm Donald Trump, I wouldn't just be worried about his tariff program and how to repay $200 billion because I don't want to get too far afield. This is not prospective. This is not, well, you collected $200 billion of tariffs when you shouldn't have, and shame on you. Don't do it again. And in the future, no, this is now. We call it void ab initio. The collection of the tariffs was illegal the moment the first dollar came in and needs now to be refunded. A lot of people are asking, am I getting money back? Probably not, because the money that was paid was by the American importers, businesses, and companies. We paid it. 70 to 90% got passed on to us in costs. But now we're going to have to rely on the goodwill of companies to say, hey, everybody, 10% off for the next 3 months because you overpaid on the tariff issues. Now, it will have a positive effect on the economy. We're already seeing moments after the decision came out, the commodities market, sugar, and and just raw commodities are off the charts now because there's been this pent up demand to react to the destruction of the tariffs, and we're seeing it. It is a good thing for the economy where tariffs have now been reduced from 20% worldwide back down to a normal 6%, and we take the club out of Donald Trump's hands to be able to extort our allies and threaten them. Oh, you won't give me Greenland? 50% tariff. You won't give me this. You're doing business with China, 100% tariff. Done. Over. And that will change the tonality of our global relationships as well. Look, everybody just joined. I'll be blunt. If you like this kind of content and you like what we're doing on Legal AF and All Rise News, it's simple. Hit the subscribe button. That's where we need your support. You're watching the videos. You're here on the live. Hit the subscribe button. And if you can swing a paid subscription, that's what gets him into his courtrooms. And you're traveling to Tennessee next week for the Kilmer Abrego Garcia. That's what keeps the lights on over at Legal AF with all the content there. And now's the time to do it. Okay. So what do you think how do you think this bodes? Do you think this is also, reading the tea leaves, tells us where some of these uh, combinations of justices may land on future cases?
You know, I said the last time that I spoke here that I was surprised that they even got 3 justices, and maybe that speaks to my naivete in the dissent here. The fact that this was such a sweeping power grab. I thought that when it came to a power grab that had such a little hook in that they said, oh, well, somewhere in the statute it says regulation, and regulation has never meant tariffs before, but it can plausibly mean regulation, and 3 justices said yes, makes me think maybe they have 3 justices for other crazy ideas like birthright citizenship. But it does show that when the most outlandish legal theories, when push comes to shove, that there are at least 6 justices that are working on a reality-based. Now, we are
They reside on planet Earth.
they reside on planet Earth, and there's a sort of thing here where I want to be clear that we're not saying that the Supreme Court is, standing up to Trump. The shadow docket has been very favorable to him. He has been able to allow people to be sent to third countries with very little to no due process on the shadow docket, and they have endorsed some hugely sweeping power grabs. When it comes to, can we restructure the constitutional order where tariffs can be placed at the whim of one man who can say, I'm concerned about drugs, and therefore the herd in McDonald Islands, I misspoke a little earlier, now must suffer.
Come on, Adam, get the islands right.
Yeah. But that uninhabited islands must be subject to these tariffs. We have learned that there are at least 6 justices on a reality-based plane.
Sure.
And we have learned, I think that that is perhaps a bellwether for the cases like the birthright citizenship case coming up. I think you are
I
correct.
agree.
I think you're correct that the Voting Rights Act is about to be gutted very soon. That hasn't
Huh?
come up yet. We will see. I
Yeah.
am loath to make predictions, and I almost never do. But we both confidently made the prediction after oral arguments that this day was coming. The questioning was so one sided. The law was so clear that it was eminently clear to anyone who watched those oral arguments that tariffs were on borrowed time. And now we know they are dead in the water today.
And let's talk about timing for a minute because the Supreme Court likes to move on its own clock. We're not influenced by outside events. We drop decisions when they're ready. No decision will be dropped before it's time. And there's no we don't have one eye on the political clock. Bullshit. They dropped this knowing that the State of the Union address was coming up and they had a decision to make. Were they going to drop it before or after the State of the Union address? And if even the three who are not on planet Earth that will say and do anything to help this president, even if it means violating the Constitution of the United States in the clear language of a statute, Alito, and this time Kavanaugh and Thomas, usually joined also by, let me just make this clear, Gorsuch has been a reliable third vote, not Kavanaugh as much, with Thomas and Alito. So the fact that not only did he step sides here, but wrote a stinging rebuke of Donald Trump almost by name in his concurrence is quite. That's why for me, I'm feeling pretty good about the birthright citizenship thing here.
Right.
Based on just the language, the vocabulary, the way that he wrote it, the wordsmithing for me, for Gorsuch, is probably the most important takeaway. I knew the Roberts was going to write it because he's going to write everything that relates to the presidency, and get those votes together. But the fact that Gorsuch broke away, but on the three, when you read the three, for me, it means that it's not going to be what it should be, like a 7-8 to 1 or 9-0 on birthright citizenship. Because how can you read the 14th Amendment and say that it only applies to newly freed slaves 200 years ago? It doesn't have any current interpretation. Look at the language John Roberts used. Nowhere in the history has any president since the 70s tried to use IEPA to impose tariffs. No one in 110 years has tried to say that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to people born on soil in the United States. So
Right.
you can just extend some of these jurisprudential approaches, and you can apply them, I think, to birthright. I want to be right on birthright, by the way. Maybe it's hopefully I'm not conducting magical thinking here, but let's talk about some of the other things that you're doing on All Rise News. Talk about what's going on with Kilmer Abrego Garcia. We just had Judge Zinnes in the civil rights, civil liberties case declare a couple of days ago in the case that he brought against the government that no, they don't get to remove him. They don't get to capture him again, put him back into ICE detention, and then remove him as part of a removal order that just became effective 7 years ago because they're 6 years too late in doing that under the statute. If you're going to want to get rid of Abrego Garcia, you're going to have to start all over again, get a new order of removal, and get him out of the country within 6 months. And just one last thing. Abrego Garcia is willing to leave the country as long as he goes to someplace like Costa Rica, which is near his family. A lot of people end up going there, and doesn't get sent 3,000 miles away to the African continent. But separately, there's this criminal case that's still pending against him with a huge hearing going on next week. Tell the audience about it.
So the hearing that's happening next week, and I'll be down in Nashville, Tennessee to cover it, is the long delayed vindictive prosecution hearing. And the fact that it's taking place is a huge win for Kilmer Abrego Garcia because it means that the burden is now on the government to overcome the presumption that they are vindictively prosecuting Abrego. Abrego has won the right to this hearing because Todd Blanche went on national television and said that the origin of the case was some judge questioned their decision to spirit him out of the country.
Judge Zinnis.
Judge Zenas, the
Right.
same judge who had come up with the ruling that you had mentioned this week, guaranteeing that he stays out of immigration detention. And think of the string of victories that he's had since March of last year when he was spirited out of the country without uh, due process, without a hearing, without notice, put on a plane and sent to a torture prison, SCOTUS in El Salvador. He won all the way up to the Supreme Court, a ruling that the government must facilitate his release. They send him back to the United States, not to be reunited with his family, but to prosecute him. He then wins a pair of rulings for release from pretrial detention. He is bonded out, and as soon as he is reunited with his family after spending one weekend, the government takes him into immigration detention. He fights for months to be released from immigration detention as Trump's Department of Homeland Security tries a number of schemes to send him to a growing list of African countries. They try to send him to Uganda. They try to send him to Eswatini, the last absolute monarchy on the African continent. They try to send him to Liberia. All of these schemes fail because he notes, Abrego's habeas corpus attorneys note that as soon as he is sent to these countries, they can send him back to El Salvador, the one place where a court is banned from sending him. And as you noted, Michael, the salient fact, and it doesn't get said often enough, is that right now, today, tomorrow, Kilmer Abrego Garcia stands willing to self-deport to Costa Rica.
Right.
So why isn't the government doing it? I was in court in Greenbelt, Maryland, where his attorneys said that in open court, 2 hearings in a row, asked by the judge. They told a federal judge, yes, if the government wants to send him to a country that will respect his human rights and won't send him back to a torture prison, he will go now. And the government hasn't acted on that because they are trying to send a message. And I am very curious, and I will find out firsthand in federal court on Thursday whether that litigation posture, the fact that they are trying to send him to a growing number of African nations that have not guaranteed to respect his human rights, and in some instances have never guaranteed that they will accept him into the country, whether that is further evidence of vindictive prosecution. So, as just to tie it all together, this vindictive prosecution hearing is already a win for Kilmer Abrego Garcia. It's the government that bears the burden to prove that they can overcome the presumption of that they are vindictively prosecuting him, and that those cards are now at his side. This could be the latest win that torpedoes his criminal case.
Look, every court that's taken a look at the issue has said that Kilmer Abrego Garcia has not committed any crimes. He's not a member of Tren de Aragua, that the people who testified against them were themselves corruptly trying to obtain, pardons and different types of things, or exoneration. And I'll go out on the limb. I'll be surprised if Judge Crenshaw doesn't find vindictive prosecution and dismiss with prejudice the prosecution against Kilmer Abrego Garcia, the result of which he'll be out of federal detention and requirements of federal detention. He's not in ICE detention, and he's being blocked from being recaptured by ICE. He'll be a free person is a in the Trump land is an interesting concept. He'll be free in the sense that he won't be subject to criminal prosecution nor capture, and that area and in ICE either, while the Trump administration apparently continues to try to remove him from the country under some sort of immigration process, which we will follow. But the great news is you're going to be in the room. You're going to step out of the court at some point. We're going to do a live together to update our audience. That's what we're all about here on Legal AF and All Rise News. We're so glad to have people here for the Popok pop-up with All Rise News. 1,300 people joined. There's more information about the tariffs you can find on Legal AF YouTube channel, on the Midas Touch YouTube channel. But if you want to support everything that Adam does, if you want to support all that Legal AF does, you're already here. You're already watching the videos. You're commenting on them. They're stimulating your interest. Show your support on Legal AF YouTube. Become a member or a subscriber. Same thing here on Substack, and do the exact same thing for Adam Klasfeld. It's easy. Just go up to the little thing on the top, hit it. It'll tell you whether you're already subscribed. And if you are, great. If you're not, subscribe to the one that you're not subscribed to. And then we've each got paid memberships that are running that really pays the bills. It keeps us on the air. So we do appreciate you all. Adam, thanks for stopping in.
Thank you, Michael. Always
All right.
great chatting.
You too. I look forward to seeing you next week off the Kilmer Abrego Garcia and all your other great reporting. Michael Popok, Adam Klasfeld. I'll see you guys later this evening on another Popok pop-up here on Legal AF Substack.